He spent his entire life crafting the perfect image. Not the kind of perfection that comes from discipline or grace, no. This was the architecture of fear. Every morning, before the world had a chance to look at him, Marcus Reed stood before the mirror and assembled himself like a man preparing for battle. The jaw set just right. The eyes steady. The suit pressed. The smile practiced until it no longer trembled at the edges. He was, by every measurable standard of beauty, extraordinary. Women turned in restaurants when he walked in. Men straightened their posture in his presence. His face had opened doors that talent alone never could have, job offers handed over before he'd even finished speaking, friendships formed on the basis of how well he fit into the visual landscape of other people's lives. Marcus had learned early that the world rewarded the beautiful, and he had decided, in that silent, steely way that damaged people make decisions, that he would use every inch of that gift. But gifts can become prisons. Because behind every mirror Marcus Reed admired himself in was a truth he had been running from since he was 11 years old. A boy in a dusty school corridor, hearing his father's voice through a cracked door. That boy has nothing going for him except his face. God help him if that ever goes. He had never forgotten it. And he had spent the next 20 years proving his father wrong in the most self-destructive way possible, by making sure that no one ever looked past the face to see if there was anything behind it. Until Amora. Marcus grew up in the kind of household where silence was currency. His father, Raymond Reed, was a man of imposing physical stature and almost pathological emotional absence. He worked hard, provided well, and loved poorly, the way some men do, believing that showing up financially is the same as showing up entirely. Raymond had built his family a beautiful house on the edge of a quiet suburb, filled it with furniture that nobody was allowed to sit on and framed photos that nobody was allowed to look too long at. Marcus's mother, Diane, was a soft woman who had learned softness as a survival strategy. She smiled when she was afraid. She cleaned when she was anxious. She hummed hymns in the kitchen on Sunday mornings and pretended, with extraordinary commitment, that everything in their household was fine. Marcus was their only child. He inherited his father's bone structure and his mother's sensitivity, a combination that would haunt him for decades. He was beautiful and tender in a world that had no framework for those two things coexisting in a boy. And so he learned to hide the tenderness. He learned to weaponize the beauty. By high school, Marcus had already developed what his teachers called natural charisma, and what his therapist, years later, would call a finely constructed social persona designed to prevent intimacy. He was the boy everyone wanted to be around and no one actually knew. He laughed at the right times. He said the right things. He dated the girls who made other people's eyes widen in approval, and he ended those relationships the moment they started asking questions he didn't know how to answer. "Who are you, really?" one girlfriend had asked him once, sitting across from him in a dim restaurant, her eyes searching his face as though she might find the answer written somewhere in his perfect symmetry. He had smiled. Deflected. Changed the subject. She was gone within 2 weeks. The older Marcus got, the more sophisticated the mask became. By 32, he had climbed to a senior position at an architecture firm in the city, not without talent, but also not without the advantage of rooms that fell quiet when he entered them. He had a penthouse apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows that he barely slept in. He had a wardrobe that cost more than most people's monthly rent. He had acquaintances in the hundreds and friends in the single digits, and even those few knew only the curated version of him. He was, by every external measure, thriving. And he was, in the way that matters most, completely alone. He met Amora Osei at a charity dinner for a foundation that supported education programs for the visually impaired. He almost didn't go. His colleague Daniel had purchased 2 tickets months before and then been pulled away on a last-minute business trip, and Marcus had only agreed to attend because he had nothing else to do that Friday and because Daniel promised him the food would be extraordinary. It was. But that wasn't what he remembered about the evening. He remembered the woman at table 7. She was seated beside an older gentleman who appeared to be her uncle, and she was dressed in a deep burgundy wrap dress that caught the light in small, deliberate ways. Her hair was natural, pulled back loosely, and her eyes were turned slightly upward toward the ceiling in the way that people who cannot see the room often do, orienting themselves by sound and sensation instead of sight. She was blind. Not recently, he would learn later. Amora had lost her sight gradually through her late teens due to a degenerative condition, and had been fully blind by the age of 21. She was now 30, had a master's degree in social work, ran a non-profit that provided job training for people with disabilities, and was, according to the uncle who introduced them, entirely unbothered by most of the things other people waste their time caring about. Marcus shook her hand and said something forgettable about the venue. You have a careful voice, she said. He blinked. Sorry? Your voice. It's careful. Like you're measuring every word before you release it. She tilted her head slightly. Most people don't do that. He did not know what to say to that. In 32 years, no one had ever commented on the texture of his voice. They commented on his eyes. His jaw. The way he filled out a suit. Nobody had ever listened carefully enough to hear the architecture of his caution. Is that a bad thing? He asked. Not bad, she said. Just interesting. It usually means someone is either very deliberate or very afraid. The dinner was 3 hours long. Marcus spent most of it at table 7. They dated for 8 months before he proposed. Marcus would not have been able to explain, even to himself, exactly why he did it. It was not a calculated decision, or rather, it was, but the calculation was more subconscious than he understood at the time. Somewhere beneath the layers of his carefully constructed self, a part of him had reasoned, she cannot see me. She cannot catalogue my face the way everyone else does. She cannot love the mask because she cannot see the mask. Which means anything she feels for me is about something else. The dangerous thing was that he wasn't sure if that terrified him or relieved him. He proposed at a restaurant she loved, in a corner booth, and told her where the ring was by placing her hand over it. She laughed, a full, unguarded laugh, and said, You're not doing this because you feel sorry for me, are you? I'm doing this, he said slowly, because you're the only person I've ever met who makes me feel like I might be more than what I look like. It was the most honest thing he had ever said to anyone. He almost took it back out of reflex. She said yes. Their wedding was written about in a local lifestyle magazine. The photographs were stunning. Marcus, golden and composed. Amora, radiant in ivory, navigating the aisle with the quiet confidence of a woman who had long ago made peace with moving through a world she could not see. The headline called them an unlikely love story. Their families used softer words but carried similar uncertainty. What nobody said aloud, but what several people thought. Why would a man who looks like that marry a woman who can't see him? The answer, the real answer, was one that Marcus himself wouldn't fully understand for another year. Marriage, Marcus discovered, was not a place you could perform indefinitely. He had expected that living with Amora would be like living with a comfortable blind spot, someone who moved through their shared life with him but remained, in some essential way, limited in what she could perceive. He had imagined a kind of sanctuary. A space where the scrutiny he felt everywhere else in the world simply wouldn't exist. He was wrong. Amora perceived everything. Just differently. Within the first 3 months of marriage, she had catalogued him in ways no one had ever bothered to. She knew the particular rhythm of his footsteps when he was worried, slightly slower, the heel landing heavier. She knew the change in his breathing when he was about to deflect a question. She knew that he rinsed his coffee mug twice, always, when he was processing something difficult. She knew that he laughed louder in front of guests than he did when they were alone, and that the quieter laugh, the one that sometimes surprised him, the one that came out soft and undefended, was the real one. You laughed differently just now, she said one evening. They were sitting on the balcony, the city humming beneath them, and Marcus had said something quiet and silly about a pigeon that had been perched on the railing for 20 minutes watching them eat dinner. What do you mean? He asked. I mean that was actually you. She turned her face toward him. The other laugh, the one you do at dinner parties, I don't know who that is. But that one just now was you. He was silent for a long time. I didn't realize I had 2 laughs, he said finally. You have several, she said, not unkindly. You have about 6 different voices too. I've been sorting through them trying to find the one that lives. The reckoning came on a Tuesday evening in November, which Marcus would later reflect was the most ordinary-sounding backdrop for the most extraordinary conversation of his life. He had come home late from work, a client presentation that had gone longer than expected, complicated by the quiet competitiveness of colleagues who had been watching him closely since his last promotion. He was tired in the deep way, the way that has nothing to do with sleep and everything to do with the constant performance of being perceived. He'd changed out of his suit and was sitting on the edge of the bed in the dark when Amora came and sat beside him. You're wearing yourself out, she said. Work was long. That's not what I mean. He said nothing. Marcus. Her voice was quiet. Steady. The way rivers are quiet, deceptively still above the current moving underneath. I need to tell you something, and I need you to actually hear it. Okay. You are the most exhausted person I have ever known. And it has nothing to do with your job, or this city, or any of the things you point to when I ask how you're doing. She paused. You are exhausted from carrying yourself. From maintaining the version of you that you think the world requires. He felt something shift in his chest. The particular, terrifying feeling of being seen. I can't see your face, she continued. But Marcus, I know your face is not the problem. I know that your face is actually the thing you hide behind. And I know that behind it there is someone who is deeply afraid that if people ever stopped looking at what he looks like, there would be nothing left worth looking at. The room was very quiet. Your father, she said simply. He exhaled, sharp, involuntary. How did you? You talk in your sleep sometimes. Not much. But enough. She reached for his hand. You said his name once. And then you said, I know, like you were answering him. Marcus did not cry easily. He had not cried since he was a teenager, and even then only alone, in the bathroom, with the tap running so nobody could hear. But sitting in the dark on the edge of that bed, with his blind wife's hand over his and the weight of 3 decades pressing against the inside of his ribs, he felt the whole elaborate structure of himself begin to shake. He thought I was empty, Marcus said. His voice was different. The careful measuring Amora had noticed at that first dinner, gone. He thought I was just a face. And I spent my whole life. I didn't know if he was wrong. He was wrong, Amora said. You don't know that. You've never. I have never seen your face, she said. That is correct. I have never once been distracted by it. Everything I know about you, I learned from who you actually are. And I am telling you, he was wrong. There is a particular kind of courage required to dismantle the thing you built to survive. Marcus did not do it overnight. He did not have one conversation with Amora and emerge, butterfly-like, from the cocoon of his performance. That is the story people like to tell, the clean arc, the single turning point, the moment of catharsis after which everything is different. Real transformation is messier and slower and tends to double back on itself without warning. But the conversation on the bed in November was a door. And once a door like that has been opened, you cannot convincingly pretend it isn't there. He started therapy, something he had resisted for years with the specific resistance of a man who fears what a professional might find if they looked too closely. His therapist was a quiet, patient woman named Dr. Okafor who had the unsettling habit of letting silences grow until Marcus felt compelled to fill them, which meant he kept accidentally saying true things. He started sleeping with the light off, a small thing, but one that had always unnerved him, the darkness where he couldn't check the mirror and confirm himself. He told Amora about his father. The real version, not the edited one. He told her about being 11 in that school corridor, about the way the words had lodged themselves so deep in his chest that for 20 years he had tried to outrun them by becoming as visually magnificent as possible. He told her about the women he had kept at arm's length and the friendships he had kept shallow and the exhaustion, the exhaustion, of being ornamental. She listened in the way she always listened, completely, without flinching, without the slight wince of discomfort that crosses people's faces when they are hearing something they do not know how to receive. Amora had been listening to the world without visual distraction for 9 years. She was, without exaggeration, the best listener Marcus had ever encountered. Can I tell you what I see? She said one night, after one of his confessions. You don't see, he said. Not cruelly, it had become a kind of shorthand between them. Then let me tell you what I perceive. She settled back against the pillows. I perceive a man who is extraordinarily perceptive himself. You notice when I'm tired before I've said anything. You remember small things, what music I was listening to when I mentioned I'd had a hard day, the name of the teacher I told you about once. You're quietly thoughtful in ways you've trained yourself not to show because thoughtfulness felt like vulnerability and vulnerability felt like weakness. Marcus said nothing. I perceive someone who is funny, genuinely, unexpectedly funny, in moments when he forgets to be impressive. I perceive a man who sat up with me for 3 hours when I had a nightmare last March and never mentioned it the next day, not because he wanted credit but because he genuinely didn't think it warranted commentary. That is not a man with nothing behind his face, Marcus. That is a man who was so busy hiding that he forgot to look at himself accurately. 6 months after that November night, Marcus did something that surprised everyone who knew him, including himself. He enrolled in a community mentorship program, one that worked with at-risk teenage boys, specifically those from households where emotional expression was discouraged and performance was the primary currency. He had not announced this to anyone. He had found the program through a flyer at Dr. Okafor's office and signed up in the same quiet, almost furtive way he had once signed up for things he was ashamed of. But he was not ashamed of this. He was, for possibly the first time in his adult life, doing something not to be seen but to see. The boys were 14, 15, 16. Many of them were beautiful in the way that young men sometimes are, sharp-featured, guarded, performing toughness with the exhausting dedication of the newly insecure. Marcus recognized himself in them with an acuity that made his chest ache. He did not give them speeches. He was not that kind of mentor. He played cards with them. He listened. He told them, when it felt right, small true things about himself, not the heroic true things, the uncomfortable ones. The ones about fear and masks and the heavy cost of being admired instead of known. One afternoon, a 15-year-old named Kofi sat across from him and said, "You're the best-looking dude who's ever talked to me like I had something going on." Marcus looked at him for a long moment. "My wife would say the same thing to me," he said. "Minus the best-looking part. She can't see me." Kofi frowned. "So how does she know you're good people?" "That," Marcus said, "is exactly the right question. There is a lie that beautiful people are sometimes told, and that they sometimes tell themselves, that beauty is armor. It is not armor. It is distraction. And distraction, unlike armor, does not protect you. It simply delays the moment when you have to face whatever you were hoping not to face." Marcus Reed had built a life on distraction. He had used his face as a sleight of hand, keeping everyone's attention fixed on the surface so that nobody, including himself, would look too long at the interior. It had worked, after a fashion, for 3 decades. He had moved through the world largely unexamined, and unexamined had felt, for a long time, like safe. But Amora had married him without ever seeing the distraction. And so there was nothing for her gaze, if you could call it that, to catch on. The sleight of hand had no effect on someone who perceived the world through vibration and texture and the architecture of breath. She had walked directly past the curtain and into the room he had kept locked his entire adult life. And the extraordinary thing, the thing Marcus turned over and over in the first years of their marriage like a river-smooth stone, was that she had not been horrified by what she found there. She had not recoiled at the fear, or the self-doubt, or the 11-year-old boy still crouched somewhere in his chest, waiting to be told he was more than his face. She had simply stayed. And kept listening. And over time, in the space that her acceptance opened up, Marcus had begun the slow, strange work of becoming someone he actually recognized. 3 years into their marriage, Marcus's father had a heart attack. It was not fatal. Raymond Reed was stubborn in that way, unwilling even to be undone by his own body. But it was serious enough to land him in the hospital for 2 weeks and to scatter the family into the uncharted territory of confronting their own feelings about each other. Marcus visited on the 4th day. He drove 3 hours to the hospital where his father lay in a bed that seemed, somehow, to have reduced him. Raymond was still broad-shouldered, still had the physical authority of a man who had spent his life occupying space, but he looked, for the first time in Marcus's memory, like someone who could be lost. They sat together for almost an hour without speaking about anything important. Raymond asked about work. Marcus answered. Raymond asked about the apartment. Marcus described it. Then, in the particular silence that descends between fathers and sons who have never learned to swim in deeper water, Raymond looked at his hands on the hospital blanket and said, "Your wife, Amora." "Yes." "She called. When I was admitted." He paused. "I didn't know she had my number. She asked me for it a long time ago. Said she wanted to be able to reach you independently." Raymond was quiet. "She said," he stopped. Cleared his throat. "The way men do when they are doing the emotional equivalent of lifting something very heavy. She said that you were the kindest person she had ever known. That you were the first person in her adult life who had made her feel like her blindness was simply a detail rather than her defining characteristic." Marcus looked at his father. "She said I should know that," Raymond continued. "She said she thought probably I didn't." The room was very quiet. "I said some things," Raymond said, "when you were young. Things I should not have said. I don't remember them exactly, but I know the shape of them. The damage they were likely to do." He looked up. "I was a frightened man. A limited one. And you paid for that." Marcus felt, distantly, that he should say something. But there were no adequate words for this particular moment, and so instead he did something he had not done since he was a child. He reached over and placed his hand over his father's on the hospital blanket. Raymond did not pull away. They stayed like that for a long time. The story of Marcus and Amora is not a love story in the conventional sense, or rather, it is a love story, but what it loves is not what these stories usually love. It is not a story about a beautiful man who fell for a woman's spirit because her body was imperfect. That narrative would be its own kind of condescension. Amora was not a broken thing that Marcus nobly chose. She was a fully realized, fiercely intelligent, deeply joyful person who happened to navigate the world without sight, and who brought to their marriage a kind of perception that the sighted world often trades away for the convenient shortcut of appearances. What she gave Marcus was not her limitation. What she gave him was her clarity. She could not see his face, and so she had looked elsewhere. She had looked at the way he moved through rooms. The way he spoke to waitstaff. The way he held her hand, loosely, always, never possessively, as though he wanted her to know that she could leave at any time. She had listened to what he said when he thought no one was paying close enough attention. She had catalogued his silences and his deflections and his rare, unguarded moments and built from all of it a portrait that was more accurate than any mirror had ever shown him. And what the portrait revealed was not what Marcus had feared. It was not emptiness behind the face. It was not the hollow inheritance of his father's dismissal. What was there, what had always been there, waiting beneath the performance, was someone capable of extraordinary tenderness. Someone patient and quietly funny. Someone who noticed things and cared about them and had simply never been given permission to let that caring be visible. He had spent 32 years believing his face was his most valuable asset. It turned out his greatest gift was something he had been hiding so carefully he had almost hidden it from himself. We live in a world that is deeply in love with surfaces. We curate our images and optimize our appearances and present to the world the version of ourselves that we have decided is most likely to be accepted, admired, and undisturbed. We are, most of us, to varying degrees, performing. And the performance is not without its purpose. There is a reason we construct these selves. There are fears behind them that are real and old and deserve to be taken seriously. But here is what Amora's story, and Marcus's story, offers us, quietly, without insisting. The person who loves you without being distracted by what you look like will love something that actually exists. The person who sees past the mask, not because they have X-ray vision or special powers, but simply because they are paying attention to what is real, will tell you things about yourself that no mirror ever will. And sometimes, the greatest mercy that can befall us is to be known by someone who has no choice but to know us truly. Marcus Reed spent his whole life hiding behind a face. It took a woman who could not see it to show him who he was.